Welcome to episode 37 of the Ikario podcast. In today's episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dave Florence from The Evolution of Dave. I first came across his work as it relates to SOMA breathing and breathwork. And if you've seen our SOMA breathing experiment, we mentioned there too that we were using his guided breathwork sessions for most of our own practice as well. Now, Dave is essentially an explorer, but also a practitioner and teacher in this kind of field of mental health and physical health. He is a SOMA breathing breathwork coach, and he has also worked with hypnotherapy and NLP, and he is a flow code coach as well. So he is someone who is really just exploring and practicing and kind of bringing systems together that all relate to the theme of how to become a better person and live a better life, especially as it pertains to like this kind of mind-body health factor. And so he's a fascinating person to talk to. I asked Dave many questions about SOMA breathing. We talk about breath work, what it's good for, who should do it and who shouldn't do it. We also talk about cold exposure, and we talk about flow states, which also relates to an ikario concept we've talked about many times, the kind of high performance at low tension idea. So Dave gives us his take on this as someone who specifically coaches people, works with people in order to help people achieve flow states. And we touch on many other topics. If you're at all interested in this kind of thing, if you're at all interested in acquiring these kinds of tools that can really upgrade your health and upgrade your life, I think you'll find this conversation really interesting. Now, as usual, we have put together some show notes, which in this case also includes links to things like where to get started with, if you want to explore something like breathwork, for example. So we'll put all these resources together in the show notes, and you can find those at ikario.com/037 for episode 37. So that's ikario.com/037. And you can also learn more about Dave by going to daveflorence.com or searching for The Evolution of Dave on YouTube. And with that, let's jump into the conversation. Before we get to the episode, I have to quickly chime in with a note from the edit of this episode. Unfortunately, on this interview, there was some issue with the audio where we had a lagging connection and somehow the audio track has our voices overlapping in some places. And I edited this out as best I could, but I just wanted to note there are still some moments where it sounds like one of us is interrupting the other before we finish forming a sentence. And I just want to let you know that this didn't actually happen in our conversation, right? We're not like rudely interrupting each other. There are just these moments where the audio track unfortunately has this overlap that I couldn't fully fix. But I wanted to publish this episode anyway because this problem really shows up only at a few moments, and it shouldn't stop us from having Dave share his wisdom with us. So with that, enjoy this conversation. All right, Dave, welcome to the show. Thank you for giving us some of your time.
Thank you. I appreciate you asking me.
Let's start with this. So your channel is called The Evolution of Dave. And, well, one of the things that comes to mind is like, well, what direction does this evolution, what are you evolving from and where are you evolving to? I'm not sure if that's even a valid question.
There is no absolute destination. This is something that I perceive as a journey. I don't ever want to get to a point where I say, yes, I figured it all out. I don't want to get to that point. I want this to be an exploratory journey. I want it to be part of experimentation. That's what I'm always preaching about, that actually that's what makes life fun. There are lots of people that ask me questions about breath work or cold therapy or anything like that. And quite often they're looking for a very specific answer that is derived from protocol. In other words, specifically, Dave, but what time should I do it and how long should I do it for and all that kind of stuff. And I typically answer, well, first of all, get whatever the method is, make sure you understand it, but then forget about the protocol. Find your own way because we're all different. And by playing with it and experimenting with it, it means that you're going to continue doing it. I think the problem that people find is that they find something that really works. And we're all nowadays like magpies. So we like the next shiny thing, don't we? We think, oh, this looks really good. I'm going to do that. And then they start seeing the benefits. especially with the likes of the Wim Hof method or SOMA breath. And then 3 months down the line, the neurochemical changes start to dissipate as your body starts to adapt and change. And then they start getting bored of that technique. But luckily, it's okay because look, there's another one over there. Let's try that. And then they do that for a few months. Oh, there's another one. And the thing is, I think they miss the benefits. Yeah. And I get it. I understand it because unfortunately, I talk about technology a lot. I use it for the business I'm in now. But of course, there is a downside to it. And one of it is that it's designed to plug you in. It's designed to hold you there for as long as possible. And through marketing and remarketing, it's designed to flash up stuff that you don't really need and tell you that this is the latest thing that you ought to try. Yeah. So you're always fighting against it, aren't you? Your psychology is always fighting against. So I guess hopefully that answers your question. For me, there is no destination. It is entirely the journey. I know it sounds like a cliche, but that is what I want. I like the fact that sometimes things don't work for me, and I tell people, and then I try something else, and if it works, I stick with it, and it becomes a part of my daily, routine.
No, that's great. That's there's lots of stuff that I definitely want to touch on. You mentioned breathwork, cold exposure. We're definitely going to get into some of these things. But first, let me dig a little bit into how you sure. got to do what you do now with this focus on like mind, body health, and all that. You describe something of like a wake up moment in your life where I guess something made you think that something's not right here or something's missing here. And I think this is a moment that many of us have at some point. Like we look around at we've been following this path that has kind of been laid out to us by society or by, our social circles or whatever. And we follow that to some degree. And then we go, hold on, is this really it? Is this really what I want? So I'd be interested to hear more about what was that moment for you, and what made you decide to kind of change directions and pursue this evolution essentially.
At the end of 2017, I had a business I ran with a friend, a recruitment business. The year was terrible. We had a fraudulent member of staff. The business wasn't really making a great deal of money. There was no energy or real drive or passion behind it. So it was no wonder things weren't going that well. We had a Christmas party that we always do. At some point, I'd obviously drank too much, and I think other things I'd consumed, because at some point, something happened. And then 5 hours later, I was found by the side of the road. And it was very strange because I still remember the feeling. I was sat in the road thinking everything was fine. In my mind, I was thinking I'm just having, a bit of time out. I'm just thinking, I'm being pensive. And then every now and again, I'd get somebody tapping me on the shoulder, asking me if I'm okay. And I'd be saying, yeah, sure. Why are you asking? I'm totally fine. And then they'd walk away. And I don't know how long, how much time elapsed. But anyway, then an ambulance arrived, paramedic got out, a couple of paramedics. And my immediate assumption was, maybe they need my help. Maybe they're lost. So I asked them, oh, do you need directions? And they said, no. So we're here for you. I said, what are you talking about? I don't need any help. And so the guy got out his phone. He took a photograph of my head. And obviously I was covered in blood. And I said, oh, okay, I see what you mean. Yeah. So we better go to hospital. So the very next day after that experience, I still don't know. Over about 5 hours, those hours are lost. I have no idea what happened. I don't know how I sustained my head injury. But my immediate thought was, I was a father of a young child. I think he was 2 at the time, a husband. And my wife was really worried. She didn't know where I was. So immediately I thought that is not how a husband and father in particular should act. That's not, that's unforgivable. I don't think I did anything untoward, by the way. I assume I don't. But either way, they were worried that's not good. And I just happened to be looking at YouTube videos on the Wim Hof method, and that struck me as that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted cold, and I wanted it to be painful, almost to shake me out of the state that I was in. In other words, I quite often talk about the Catholic flagellants that were around. I can't remember the what century, maybe the 15th, 14th century. And of course, they would whip themselves with these sort of nailed whips, creating pain. And in that was the kind of psychology. It was just the kind of psychology was was nothing to do with religion, but it was something to do with, if I cause myself this shock to the system, maybe it will reset my state. And that's exactly what it did. 3 months later, I was so excited by the Wim Hof method, the cold therapy, and I just started the breath work. I thought, right, time to create a YouTube channel. I want to tell other people about this. And I don't know where I got the name from, but it seemed to be the right thing to say. And then that's it. And then really from then till now, I've accumulated qualifications really just by putting stuff out, finding a new method, thinking that's great. I might become qualified in that, telling people about it. And then my subscribers would say, hey, Dave, have you tried this? And then I'd try it. And, so it's gone from me leaving the corporate space that I was in to doing this now full time. And now feeling like I am totally aligned with my path. Before I was on the well-trodden path, this is what I often talk about. The well-trodden path that always didn't feel right. Now I'm on the untrodden path. I have no knowledge of where I'm going, ahead. I can't see the future. All I know is it feels right to be there. And the more I stay there, the more in flow I become.
So you started with the Wim Hof method, cold exposure, breath work. And what was your experience of that? Was it, apparently it worked, right? As you describe it, you wanted something to kind of shake you or shock you out of your old habits. Apparently that worked. What was your experience of that?
So I remember watching a video where somebody was saying, right, if you're going to do cold showers, that's how I started. Then you need to go easy. You need to take it easy. You need to start off warm and then gradually turn it cold. And I remember thinking at the time, that's not what I want. I don't want it to be easy. I don't want it to be a gradual change. I want it to be a shock. So I remember going into the shower, immediately turning it as cold as I possibly could and just enduring it. And of course, when you first start doing cold showers, you can't help but scream and shout. You can't help but that involuntary shiver as your body's trying to deal with it. I didn't know how to get used to it. I didn't know any of the techniques that you can use. But I was happy to do it. But I remember that feeling immediately afterwards. In the shower, it was endurance. Out the shower, it was this, wow, I feel amazing. But the biggest thing for me was the breath work. When I started doing the Wim Hof method breath work, I remember, I think it was about a month in, and this is the point where your body's still trying to adapt to these changes, and it's flooding you with endorphins, with other positive neurochemicals. And I remember this one morning where I literally wanted to go outside and scream to the world, I feel effing great, as in yes, it was this, it was almost like this, I was starting to be evangelical about it. I was starting to say, guys, you should do this, my friends, family, and obviously everybody was ignoring me because why would they listen to, a friend or a family member give them this weird advice? But yes, I remember those early days. It was lovely.
Yeah, and also you're in the UK, where I imagine the cold shower is actually pretty freezing cold. Because I'm in Portugal right now. The cold water here is, it's wimpy.
Yes, the cold showers are cold. It's interesting actually because I've experienced this recently in another house where the cold shower just didn't get cold enough, and it frustrated me. But very early on, I moved to the garden hose anyway. In other words. Because I was thinking, no, I want it to be full on, So I wanted it even in winter, whilst it's snowing. I wanted, if I could get the hose to work, if it wasn't frozen up, I wanted that, that kind of cold. And I remember listening to David Goggins at the time as well. And of course, David Goggins, you're probably aware of him. I didn't like him at first because he's always every other word is F this, F that, and it's a very deliberate language that I couldn't really tune into. When I then heard his story, I totally related and understood where he was coming from, and then I really listened to what he was saying. And of course, a lot of what he's saying is about a lot of his message is about callousing the mind, and I think that's what I was looking for. I wanted to callous the mind. In other words, develop this resilience.
Yeah, it's very interesting to me. So I've done a lot of cold exposure in various different ways as well. And it is interesting to me that it seems to be a lot about the attitude and what you describe, where you want the cold. I think that the thing that makes one suffer the most in cold exposure is wanting to avoid the cold. You get into an ice bath and you kind of trying to escape the ice. that's going to make you suffer. But if you go, yes, I actually want this, and your attitude is even, I want more of this, make it more cold.
I think you can apply that to lots of different things that in which you are enduring. But also, I've discovered that when it comes to cold therapy, men and women deal with it differently. Women are far better often because they relax into it, they breathe into it. Men, they adopt this kind of very masculine approach, and they try to muscle their way through it. So they're all tense and God, just keep going. And but that doesn't work, of course. It's you're negatively affecting your physiology by doing that. Whereas if you learn how to breathe through it, slow down your breathing. If you're in the cold shower, you aim the cold to the back of your neck, and that kicks in the mammalian dive reflex that slows down your heart rate. If you're in ice, it really is more a case of just longer exhales, which kicks it. They kick in the parasympathetic nervous system, which again makes you feel calm and relaxed. So then you will be, and that's what women tend to be. I know I'm generalizing, but that tends to be what happens. Because men, it's a bit like when you take a man climbing. His instinct is to use his arms, to muscle his way up. But of course, then his arms blow halfway up because he's not using the right muscle groups to get up there. We have this stupid instinct that it feels like the right thing to do. Whereas, if we're able to shut off that instinct, you can apply this to lots of things. Shut off the instinct, breathe your way through it, and you're fine. If you look at fighters, for example, in the UFC, those that are able to calm the mind beforehand rather than get into the cage and go, "Argh." If you think about it, when you're in that angry state, you're in fight flight. The problem with fight flight is you become irrational. Much of your brain is shut down. If you stay calm in a fight, you've got all this intelligent brain and the subconscious that will allow you to flow through it, and therefore you'll be able to react quicker.
It's interesting. Even just talking to you makes me want to jump in an ice bath again. So you're clearly having that effect.
we should do a podcast in an ice bath, perhaps.
In an ice bath, yeah. There's a really funny. There's a YouTuber called Juji, who has done interviews where he puts people in an ice bath and he interviews them until they can't stand it anymore. It's very funny. And they even do like sitting in an ice bath and eating ice cream while talking, and you just see people freaking out, and it's very funny. No, that's good. And so do you feel like, cold exposure, is it basically something you've done on a regular basis ever since you got into it? Have you just every day? Wow, okay. And do you feel like, does this kind of mental toughening, like you talked about, and this attitude, do you feel like that carries over into other areas of your life?
When it comes to the cold, because of the enduring nature of it, the fact that you're calming yourself in a period of stress, what we now know, of course, is that stress is good for you. People have that assumption that stress is bad for you. Actually, it's very good for you, but only in short bouts. So Sean Aker, professor at Harvard, has done some really interesting studies on this. So I know that short bouts of ice therapy, short bouts of cold shower that kickstart a stress response on the brain and the body is good for me. And it's also because of your psychological reaction, my psychological reaction, I know that has absolutely had an effect on other areas of my life. So over the last 3 years, during all these wonderful times, I've also had some significant highs and lows that have gone on outside of this world. And I've quite often stated in my YouTube, I'm either feeling low or we're going through some tough times. There's been some pretty traumatic times. Had I not had these practices, especially the cold therapy, I wouldn't have dealt with them as well as I did. And I'm not being arrogant by stating that, but more of a fact. I think in part as well, I almost adopted this stoic psychology inadvertently. It wasn't a conscious thing. But when we were going through some really tough times, I was able to kind of switch off in many respects emotion in order to deal with the task at hand. It's really interesting now when I think about it. But I do think that will have come from things like the cold therapy, and especially the cold therapy, because of what you're doing. You're forcing yourself into a stressful situation in order to deal with it on a regular basis.
Yeah. No, remember. So I discovered, cold exposure a few years ago or so, but much earlier than that, I got into training. And I feel like that's also something where you have this kind of carryover where training teaches you to just, show up, do the work. And yes, it hurts, but you just, at least certain kinds of pain, right? Certain kinds of pain, you just, you have this stoic attitude, essentially. Yes, it's hard. Yes, part of me wants to just stay in bed, but I'm just doing it. And there's this carryover where then in other areas of life, like you say, you have tough times, but there's this part of your brain that already knows how to do this. It's already, oh yeah, things are tough, but I'm just still going to show up and I'm still going to do it. I think that is a really perhaps underrated value of this kind of stuff, right? Because I think that nowadays, when we think about physical training, it seems like most of the way we encounter it is essentially it's just about looking good naked, right? We see people who have amazing physiques, and like that's the goal. That's you go to the gym in order to look like that and to be admired. And I feel like these other benefits are perhaps a bit underrated.
Yeah, or maybe they're even rated, but people just don't choose to think about them because, as you say, they're too consumed by the idea of the body beautiful. And although that is a deeper conscious thought if you were to ask them, that wouldn't of course be their answer. Their answer would be, well, I'm looking to improve my overall health and physiology. But I think you're right. And especially for men when they go through their peacock phase, when they're displaying their feathers. I remember that phase in my 20s. You're presenting an image, you're displaying your feathers in order to attract a mate. It's very animalistic. But of course, the way you do it is it puts off most other women because you're going overboard. You don't realize that actually there's something else that they're looking for. Well, I think anyway, for most women, certainly my experience back then, it was all about show, look what I've got, rather than, seeing deeper.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. That's another awkward phase. We have many that we have to go through.
Although less so when you get into your 40s. And I tell you what, a really key thing for me was at a point when I realized I don't care. I don't care what people think. Such a liberating feeling.
That's powerful, yeah.
And you can see that in my channel because I do some odd things in there sometimes where I just think, well, stuff it, I don't care.
Yeah, that's very powerful. It's I absolutely agree. Yeah. We are a lot. So at Ikario, one of the themes is freedom. How do you achieve freedom essentially? And I think that is one of the key components. The social freedom, where you're just not that concerned anymore about what do other people think. And I feel like that's a really a weight off the shoulders when you can achieve that. I
agree. There's actually quite an interesting philosophical thought around this whole freedom thing, because if you live in the West, it doesn't matter where you are, everybody should feel free. And it's only because of the detritus that we collect, it's only because of the stuff that we collect, both material as well as psychological and commitment stuff, that we don't feel free. I remember working in Zambia. My brother was working, I visited him, and I spent some time with some people out there. And these are people that by Western standards had nothing. But by Western standards, they were 100 times happier. I know it's a cliche, but it's funny, isn't it? How those in the West are striving to be happy, to feel free, to have all these things that should be natural. They should just be there. We should feel that. But we get attached to jobs. We get attached to relationships. We get attached to all these things, which, much of which you can remove, and you will then feel more content and free.
Yeah, it does seem that we are in some very significant ways. I think that our culture is like pushing us the wrong way in some very significant ways. And one of the things that attracted me to your work was that basically almost immediately when I came across one of your videos, my impression was that, oh, here's someone who has either already successfully escaped or is escaping that trajectory, right? There's like this trajectory that we're put on and I'm particularly talking about like Western cultures, like you say, we're like very consumer focused, and we have all these ideas that they seem normal to us, so we never question them. But all the ideas about what it means to live a good life, how to be happy, and so on, seems to put us on a trajectory that very reliably creates illness and misery, and we can see that in various public health statistics. And it seems to me that you're someone who's like, oh, I noticed that there's something wrong, and you're like changing the trajectory. You know, you're finding ways to untangle yourself from
what's
that.
really silly, it took a bang to the head for me to do that. How stupid is that? You know, we wait for fear, out of fear, and we don't want to take the risks. And then it's only when we have these life-affirming moments, for some people are faced with death, whatever it might be, but something that really wakes us up, that we then go, right, light bulb, I now get it. Okay, I need to get off that path. And it's really silly. And I never look back and regret anything I did. I think it's all kind of meant to be my journey. I don't sort of see it that way, but whilst I don't regret, there were probably things I could have done better with my time that would have been a bit more useful. But at least, I'm grateful for what I'm doing now and having figured some things out. Like I said, at the beginning there, I haven't figured it all out. I don't want to figure it all out, but I figured some things that are working for me. And I have a feeling that if they work for me, some of these things are going to work for others.
Yeah. So with that, let's get into breathwork. You've mentioned that several times as an important component, and it's also actually this is how I came across you. I'm not sure how I got there, but I was searching for SOMA breathing, and I came across your guided SOMA breathing sessions, which are my favorite ones available on YouTube, or the ones you have where it's just a 20-minute session, and I think it even says in the title like no nonsense. It's not talking about SOMA breathing for 10 minutes first, right? It just goes straight into the session. And then I thought these were great. I really enjoyed these, and then I also did them with our whole team. And it was actually funny. So we were doing a series of just personal development experiments with the whole team. And we usually did them for like 7 to 10 days in a row. And with the SOMA breathing, it's like we just kept going. Everybody wanted to keep doing it when we were doing it every morning. So we were listening to you. We were listening to your voice guide us through these sessions basically every day for a while. So I'm really grateful for those. Those are really good sessions. So first of all, I think that probably not everyone listening is familiar with SOMA breathing. So can you give us like a quick intro, like, what is SOMA breathing and why?
Yeah. So first of all, breathwork is thousands of years old. Nothing new here. In fact, I've got a book here you might be able to see called Science of Breath, written in 1904. A friend of mine sent this to me. Amazing book. Everything in there is exactly what we talk about. The only difference is that they use a different language.
Wow.
But anyway, breathwork goes back centuries old. And it's not just Indian. I mean, obviously the power breathing in SOMA breath and the Wim Hof method, they're both exactly the same technique, really. SOMA breath adds some enhancements, which I'll go into in a second. But they're all derived from pranayama, which is a yogic breathwork practice. There are some elements of tumo, which is Tibetan, but you get breathwork in ancient Chinese culture, Japanese, especially in the martial arts. So breathwork isn't just yogic derived or yoga derived, but it is old. And us in the Western world, like we've done with a lot of things, have kind of shut the door on these old ancient ideas and techniques. But luckily, and I think we have Wim Hof really to thank for this, really. When you think about it, yes, there's lots of other people out there promoting different styles, but it was Wim. It's good old Wim and his craziness that brought it to the fore. You need somebody to stand out and be nutty, for people to listen. Anyway, so the breath work used in SOMA breath and the Wim Hof method is thus. First of all, you start with something that is described as power breathing. So it's an inhale followed by an exhale, and then you repeat. Now, in the Wim Hof method, they would typically say you do between 30 and 40 inhale exhales. And certainly they used to simply just say, but not really think about the amount of time on the how many seconds on the inhale versus the exhale. With the SOMA breath protocol, it is very specific in the sense that you get some routines that are inhale for 4 seconds, exhale for 2. Sometimes it's 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out. Sometimes it's 4-8. Lots of different methods. They all provide a different result. So anyway, you do this, what is really hyperventilating for a period of time. Mm-hmm. Then you inhale all the way, followed by exhaling all the way, and then holding your breath. This feels strange at first because your mind is saying, hang on a minute, you've just blown out all the oxygen. How can you hold your breath? Or blown out the carbon dioxide, in fact. But of course, what we now understand is that you can hold your breath a lot longer than you ever imagined. And that holding of the breath after the exhale is known as intermittent hypoxia. Very similar to high altitude training. And what you're doing is you're developing a tolerance to higher levels of CO2. You're holding your breath, you're not expelling that CO2. And you then hold your breath for a period of time. You don't want to force it. That's very important, especially if you're new to it. It's not about breaking records. A lot of people get into this analytical mindset of how long they can hold their breath for. Don't worry about that. Just do it for as long as it feels comfortable at first. And then at the point when you think you need to inhale, you then inhale all the way and again hold your breath for a period of time, but not too long. And that is it. That is one round. So there's lots of discussions about how many rounds that you should do. There's a wonderful piece of research called The Therapeutic Potential of Intermittent Hypoxia, a Matter of Dose. It's on PubMed. It's brilliant. But even that doesn't give you clear answers. And although this is, thousands of years old, I don't think there's enough research because from a scientific perspective, it's only recent that they've started to study this. There's not enough to give you an absolute answer as to how much of this type of breathing you should do. Therefore, SOMA breath say just do a daily dose, which is 2 rounds every day, and you will be fine. And I agree with that. And then every maybe 5 or 6 days, try 4 or 5 rounds in one go. When you do that, interesting things start to occur.
Okay.
And this is when in SOMA breath, for example, they do what's called the awakening ceremony, where you build up to that level of breathing. And in the last week of that ceremony, people start experiencing, they feel like their brain has been awakened. And women actually feel orgasmic. They have some very orgasmic kind of experiences. Well, we do. We just don't have it to the same level as them. I mean, they're going a bit nuts. For some women, it is quite an experience. But yes, you're right. I think that is atypical of men versus women in the main anyway, isn't it? Yeah. So yeah, there we are. That is power breathing.
Yeah, this is great. So, and also let me say, we will put in the show notes and on YouTube in the description, we will put links to where you can get started with this, right? So if you're thinking, oh, this sounds cool, I want to do this, we'll put resources there for this. I want to pick up on a couple of things you mentioned. One of which is that, as you say, with the breath hold, that you're not trying to force it. And I've had this experience as well where it is completely outside of my control, and it's almost bizarre to feel how the first time I did it, it felt very difficult to hold my breath for, I don't know how long it was, but let's say 30 seconds, and I was out. And then, but without pushing myself, without additional effort, a few sessions in, I'm just sitting there in complete peace in this exhaled state in the breath hold, and it's not difficult. It doesn't take twice the effort to go from 30 seconds to 1 minute breath hold. It's you just let your body adapt. And I've actually had the same experience with cold exposure. I did ice baths every day in the same temperature for a while. And I had the same experience where it's, if I'm just sitting there and relaxing, I extended the time I could stay in the cold, but I just kind of let my body do it. I'm not trying harder and harder, right? I'm not increasing my willpower. I'm just letting my body adapt to this stimulus. And it's just really interesting to see that happen too. It's just a very fascinating situation to be in, where suddenly you're sitting there in this breath hold, and you lose track of time, and it's just I don't know. It's weird, right? It's weird that you can just sit there in an exhaled state and everything's fine. It's such a special experience.
Totally.
Too, yeah.
And it only improves for a while. If you keep doing it, you are going to get some real highs from doing it. But what's interesting there is that exactly what you should be doing. I don't think you should force much in life. There's not much you need to force, as I quite often joke about. Unless you've forgotten your front door keys, there's not much you need to force. And therefore, the less you force, the more likely you're going to be in flow. The more likely you're going to go about life in the right way, moving like water, as Bruce Lee would talk about. But it's so true, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I think when it comes to that exhale breath hold, what's going on there initially is obviously this. When you first do it, your mind is sending you messages, and those messages are derived from a gas buildup. In other words, it's the buildup of CO2 that sends a message to the brain saying you need to breathe. So really, it's your mind kicking in far too early. And this is all you're doing really initially with this kind of breath work is you're messing with your mind. You're just saying, okay, actually, no, I'm going to ignore you now. I'm going to ignore you whilst I do this. Your message is far too early. I don't need that message just yet. Give me time. But again, I think we should add here again that the sooner you learn how to listen to your body and understand when you should inhale, when it does feel right, the easier this becomes. And that's why you should go in easy, take it slowly, build it up over time. Because, people do black out, obviously, if they push it too much.
And what would be the cue? In a way, we've talked about what SOMA breath is, but not so much like what it's good for, other than feeling good, right? What is the cue? Like, what would you say is like, this kind of person should try this, or in this situation you should try this? What is like the...
So there are certain things you shouldn't do this type of breath work for. So, if you've got COPD, for example, if you're suffering some kind of heart arrhythmia, then you shouldn't do this kind of breath work. Remembering that SOMA breath isn't just this sort of breath work. It's actually a variety of different protocols, and some include breath holds, some don't. So I think if we look at breath work in an umbrella term, everybody should try it. There will always be a breathwork practice that everybody can do, regardless of their condition, their state. Some people who are in a particularly stressful state, I don't think the power breathing would necessarily be the right course of action for them, initially, because if you imagine it is causing a stress on the body. So if you're already, in these heightened stress-based states, then adding to that might not be a good thing. I have heard stories of people, having panic attacks. I've heard various different physiological results because people went into it either too fast or they went into it in the wrong kind of state. I think if you're in a good place psychologically, if predominantly your health is all right, then crack on, do it. It is a wonderful practice. Actually, for those that do suffer depression or stress and anxiety, the cold therapy can be a very good experience. And it actually might be better to do that first. There's lots of stories that, of people getting into cold water swimming, for example, that previously suffered depression and anxiety. There are lots of protocols in breathwork, obviously, that are very good for people that do suffer from stress. And they tend to be the parasympathetically derived breathwork practices. In other words, practices that make you feel calm, that slow down your heart rate, your blood pressure. And perhaps something worth noting, every inhale that you do increases your heart rate and your blood pressure briefly. And therefore, every exhale does the opposite. So let's say you're stressed and you don't know anything about breath work. You're probably breathing from the top, from the chest, and you're shallow breathing. You're not taking big lungfuls. Excuse me. And you might well also be mouth breathing. All of that is a recipe for further exacerbating your problem. You're going to keep increasing your heart rate, your blood pressure. You're only going to get worse if that's what you're doing. However, if you know something about breath work and you know you're feeling a bit rubbish and you think, okay, well then I should use my nose because that is optimal breathing, and I should breathe in all the way and then exhale really, really slowly through pursed lips and keep it going, keep it going. And then I'll do it again. I'll do that a few times. That will slow down my heart rate, give me a moment of clarity, a moment of rational thought before I can then maybe do another kind of breathwork practice, because I've now got time to think. Whereas if they went straight into power breathing, it might well send them off in another direction.
That's a really interesting point. Yeah, because the kind of thing like Wim Hof breathing and SOMA breathing, it's this one protocol, and let's say it's like on the extreme end, right? You're using, and it's like an extreme version of breathing to get an extreme result. But the really crazy thing is that basically no one ever taught us to just use normal breathing and to understand how this kind of connection, what you just laid out. It strikes me as one of those things where it's like, how come nobody has ever told me this before, you know?
And, we've
forgotten
just
about
assume,
it.
Well, he just breathes through his mouth. That's no problem. He's still taking in O2. It's okay. But actually, that O2 isn't going anywhere. Only bits of it are going into the bloodstream. Most of it isn't going into the tissues where he needs it, or she. So, it's only recently that I think people have understood the benefits of having this big old nose on your face that we've all got. That it does so much. It filters out particles. It as the cold air enters the nose, it changes the temperature to the correct body temperature. It moves the oxygen into the bloodstream. It knows what to do when it's there. It sends the oxygen into the tissues. So without this, we will suffer without using it properly.
So that's the breathwork piece. Now, something that you've mentioned here as well is is flow states, and you are a flow code coach, I believe. This is something I have no idea what that is. So can you give us also an intro to this piece?
So it's the Flow Global Initiative, Slovenian company, led by a lovely chap called Sergei and Milan. They decided to conduct research into whether or not you could actively encourage more flow state experiences. So a flow state, when we talk about that, is something that everybody experiences at some point in their life. Most people not that often, but high-level sports people regularly. And a flow state, so Ayrton Senna described it beautifully. He said, in one race, it felt like both myself and the car became one. In other words, there was no distinction between Ayrton Senna, the human, and the car, the machine. They were one. There was no thought. Johnny Wilkinson in this country is a famous rugby player, and he helped us win the World Cup in 2003. And I heard him describe this. He didn't describe it as a flow state, but I knew what he was talking about. He was talking to Bear Grylls, and he was saying, so Bear Grylls had asked him, what was it like when you did that final kick? So by the way, this kick was a drop goal at the end, and it won us the game. It was incredible, perfectly timed. And he said, when I dropped the ball for the kick, at that point, I felt like I'd left my body. But I knew, even before I kicked the ball, that it was going to go between the posts. He said, I knew, absolutely 100%. I didn't know how I knew that, but I knew it. And I didn't feel like I had control over what was going on, but it was all happening there. And he said what was interesting, as soon as the ball went between the posts, only when the crowd cheered and all of his teammates rushed towards him did he then suddenly feel like he'd gone back into his body and he was able to enjoy the moment. That is a flow state. It's when you feel like you have control over time. Everything is going your way and you know nothing can take you out of it. It is this incredible feeling where everything is in flow. And what's going on is your brainwave pattern changes. It gets close to kind of a gamma brainwave pattern. And it's an incredible moment. Everybody should experience it, because when you're in that state, life is amazing. But you don't always know it necessarily. You almost have this blinkered tunnel vision. Anyway, so what we've now got via the Flow Code and the Flow Global Initiative are protocols and practices that when you practice them regularly, you will not only encourage more of those flow state moments, but also create more flow in general. And what we mean by that is where things are just going well for you, where, you end up having opportunities thrust upon you that perhaps they were thrust upon you before, you just didn't recognize them. You have a positive conversation with somebody here that results in something over there. Wherever your journey's taking you, it feels very smooth. But this is something that would happen naturally had it not been for the fact that we've created all these blockages. So blockages from toxicity, blockages from the way we live in our Western world, the material need, the commitment to job, the expectations of others, our own expectations. But if you work at practices that remove all of that, you then start heading into flow, and that's what I teach, along with those various other things.
Yeah, there's this. I'm also seeing like it connects to some of the other stuff we've talked about, where sometimes like more effort, right, bringing in like more tension and trying harder is very counterproductive, because it takes you out of that, or it removes the possibility of getting into such a flow state. And one of the ways I think about this is that almost your conscious thinking, so it's like what you think of as me, and the me voice in my head has a relatively narrow bandwidth. There's not that much I can process consciously. And clearly, like unconsciously, I can process a lot more. And that's pretty clear. Like the typical example of this is learning how to drive a car, where when you're doing it consciously, it's totally overwhelming, way too many things to think about. And you have to use your hands and feet, and you're all over the place. And it's the whole process of learning how to drive a car is outsourcing it to your subconscious. You have to let your subconscious do this, because you just don't have enough. Like the narrow focus, the laser focus of your attention is just not suitable for this task. And I think that, like what you described with this, almost like out of body experience, it's like that conscious part is just like, I have no job here. And you start experiencing just the vast complexity of everything else that's going on. And it indeed feels like that's not me that's doing this, because it's not that, like it's almost like you have this little pilot like sitting in your prefrontal cortex, or who thinks he's always in charge, but it's like no, actually you're not that important.
That's it. And in fact, you've hit the nail on the head there with the PFC. Transient hypofrontality is when you slow down the prefrontal cortex. And it's that in that prefrontal cortex when that analytical mind kicks in, isn't it? When the monkey mind keeps chatting away, saying you're not good enough, or that negative introspection, or whatever it might be. If you can slow this down, the prefrontal cortex, you've got this huge machine ready and waiting to take over, which actually is already doing a shed load of stuff anyway. But if you give it that control, I mean, the car analogy there is perfect. If you're driving on a journey from point A to point B, you don't need the conscious brain. It's the subconscious brain that does it, as you say. So therefore, that can be quite a relaxing experience if it weren't for the fact that we're always thinking about other things that kick in. But that's often when, the brainwave pattern is different when you're in that state. In clinical hypnotherapy, we guide people into a theta-controlled state when they're on the couch, because that's when your brain is more malleable. You're open to suggestion, which is why you use suggestible language in hypnotherapy. And quite often with flow, with hypnotherapy, with binaural beats, if you ever listen to binaural beats or isochronic tones, it's all about changing your brainwave pattern to a state where it's far more efficient at the task at hand, be it the task being going to sleep or the task being needing to focus. You can take control of this now and direct it to where you want it to go.
And so I think that it sounds like, and I think probably most people have experienced some form of flow state, or at least I hope so, right? That there's some things you get into where you get into this flow state. I think the primary problem is that it feels inaccessible. And I guess that's what you teach, is like how do you actually flip the switch, so to speak, to get into this state. And is that, so let me ask you, like, to what degree can we kind of decide I want to be in a flow state now and make that happen?
So I've experienced a flow state whilst working in front of the computer. I've experienced a flow state whilst running down a mountain. I've experienced a flow state whilst riding a motorbike through the twisties in the mountains. And everybody can experience it. And quite often it's not something that you would ever have consciously created. It's just something that happens and you think, wow, that was incredible. You know, it could just be simply, wow, that was incredible. How on earth did I get all that done? You know, how I did that was nuts.
Yeah.
But anyway, so a lot of it is around initially, if you want to experience this kind of thing, intention is key. So when you wake up in the morning, one of the things I quite often talk about is you wake up, you set your intention, and your intention should be, I want to flow through today, making use of the various protocols that I teach on my course or, you know, via the flow code, which will be partly breath work. There'll be partly kinesiology, partly movement based, movement flow. But the important thing is, it's not what you do, it's how you do it. And also, another important factor is that people think, if I say what I've just said, people are thinking, I haven't got time. How on earth can I do all that in one day? Well, actually, you only need to do 1 or 2 minute exercises typically. You don't have to do 20 minutes here, 20 minutes there. And what I use is something called mindfulness timer on my phone. There's lots of different apps out there. I'm not associated with this. It's just one that works. And it just chimes with a little Buddhist sounding bell every 45 minutes. When that bell goes off, that reminds me to do something to change my state. It could be I might want to go down and do some push-ups. It could be I want to have a little walk in nature, tap into my senses. It could be I want to do some breath work. You know, whatever it is, doesn't matter what one of those, as long as they actively change my state. Because if I've been working in front of the computer, after 45 minutes, I'm already losing, you know, efficiency and developing brain fog. The electromagnetic frequency, believe it, you know, some people believe it, some people don't, but will have, I believe, an effect on the brain and the body. Just the fact that I've been sat down. The brilliant thing about us two doing this podcast right now is we're both standing up. So good for you. You know, the more we do that, obviously, the better it is. But even if we're doing this, standing up, we're still in front of a computer. We're doing one task. So it's good just to switch it up. You know, all you got to do is, 2-3 minutes, maybe 5 minutes doing something. You get back to your task that you were at before. You've changed the blood flow in your body, changed the gas exchange of O2, CO2, and you've changed your state.
And so you're specifically then trying to do something that is mindful, that connects you
Not
to
always.
the present moment.
You know, I quite often say, juggle. People, you know, the wonderful thing about juggle is that you can't think about stuff when you're juggling. Your reaction time has to be so quick, it can only be done by the subconscious. So, in other words, what is it? It's meditation, therefore. Juggling is meditation. So, yes, it could be something that's more mindful, brings you into the present. If you do that every 45 minutes, brilliant. But it doesn't have to be. Push-ups aren't necessarily going to bring you into the present, but what they are going to do is just change your state. I teach chair yoga. So that's really useful. Let's say if you are in a job that has you sat at your computer all day, you know, you've got loads of Zoom calls, which of course is a really bad idea, but let's say you do. You can learn chair yoga techniques that provide resistance whilst you're breathing, that will just create more blood flow around the body, just change your state briefly before you probably in the next 45 minutes really do need to get off your backside and do something else. But, you know, at least it's a technique that, again, helps change the state.
And so by practicing this, you then eventually... How does this connect to getting into a flow state?
First off, what you're doing is you're just encouraging more flow in your life. In other words, by doing all of these practices, meditating in the evening, perhaps, breath work in the morning, whatever it is, just making sure you're doing what I call pre-flight checks. So you're switching all the switches on your airplane before you take flight. And then in the middle of the day, you're doing in-flight checks with whatever protocols you fancy doing. Only by doing that on a regular basis, in other words, every day, do you see changes in your life. Let's say you're in a job you dislike. You know you ought to do something about it, but all the other commitments are holding you in that job. If you practice these techniques on a daily basis, you're going to have a light bulb moment. That light bulb moment could just simply be you have a conversation with your boss and then you work part-time. Or it could well be that you hand your notice in. It's just an example. From that then leads on to you creating a path that aligns with who you are. And then as soon as you start doing that, aligning your passion with what you love to do, because let's face it, if you're a top level sportsman, passion is linked somewhere to what you do. You then start to experience these flow state moments. And it doesn't have to be 100% passion. It doesn't have to be, how on earth can I find something to do that's something that's totally derived by passion? But as long as a major part of it is, or significant moments that are, and in those moments, that's when these flow states are going to occur. Because you're aligning. There's a model by Csikszentmihalyi. I never know how to pronounce his name. And it's a wonderful model all about flow states. And it's all to do with marrying your skill level with the challenge. So let's say, and I'll use the same example. You've decided to change your career in some way. And whatever it is, it requires a challenge because you're making this big change. But you've got just enough skill level to meet the challenge. And if you have too much skill for the challenge, then the challenge isn't challenge enough. So you've got to up your game. And when you do that, you find a point on the graph where both you've got just enough skill level to meet the challenge, then you start experiencing again these flow state moments because you have this wonderful flow that you're in because things are going right for you and you're getting excited by what's going on. But it's not too much, because if you have too much skill for the challenge, you'll get bored. You'll give up because you're thinking that's too easy. So it's quite a sort of a careful, deliberate point at which you marry both, and then things start to go well.
So it's about the process, right? You want to cultivate this process in order to, one of the things I'm hearing out of what you're saying is that it's a mistake to try and kind of jump to the finish line, because the thing that will give you access to flow states might be a few steps removed from where you are right now, such as a career change or something like that. And so you have to have a process, you follow that process, and you kind of let things unfold and move you towards where you can create circumstances for yourself that are more likely to put yourself in a flow state.
So a few years ago, I was really into running. This is a good 10 years ago. And I started doing endurance stuff. And then I did a few mountain runs. And I remember distinctly in Wales running down a mountain, and it was on a scree slope. And there was a point at which I genuinely felt like I was a goat. And I knew that wherever I put my foot was going to be the perfect place to put my foot. At no point was I thinking, oh, I ought to be careful, I might fall. Because, of course, as soon as you think that, you are going to fall. So I had this, it felt like I was able to bounce on cloud. It was just incredible, this feeling. That was a flow state. I only got there because I loved what I was doing. I loved running. I was putting in the miles. I was doing lots of training. So my skill level was improving. And the challenge at that time was just within reach. And there must have been some other things going well for me at the time. Maybe I was in it, I don't remember, but let's say I was in a good relationship, let's say things were going well in my job for the last week. Let's say, whatever it was, there was a marrying of all these different things happening at once. That's what it is. So and if you imagine, it's easy to think of it in terms of a top level sports person, because if you think of what they're doing, they are putting in hours upon hours to the one thing. Hopefully they still love what they do. And if they are a top level sports person, they're probably getting paid a lot of money. So all those financial worries are out the window. There's probably lots of other good things happening to them at the same time. And so therefore they end up, when in competition time, in these wonderful flow state moments. So that's probably a really good way of describing it. It's kind of all good things happening at once. So therefore, if you start learning mindful activities that don't have to be meditation, a lot of people get put off by meditation. They think they can't do it. Hence why I say do juggling, or use a boxing focus ball, whatever it is. By doing breath work, which has so many benefits physiologically and psychologically, by doing balanced-based exercises, by setting yourself little challenges. On my YouTube channel, I did the Bring Sally Up push-up challenge, and I said this is my balanced challenge. In other words, I know I can do a push-up. The challenge to be able to meet that, on that, if you've ever come across that challenge, I don't know if you ever have, I knew that I could one day do it. So it was just enough. And I was doing it deliberately to say, this is the reason why I'm doing it. So it's a series of different things. It's a process, as you say.
Yeah, that's great stuff. So it's like this convergence of circumstances in a way, yeah. All right, so one more thing I'd like to ask you. As someone who's, you're this explorer in the space, right? You're trying out all these different things, you're integrating loads and loads of practices into your life. A problem that I've encountered, and a lot of people I've talked to encounter sometimes when we're doing this self-improvement work, is that we can get to the point where it feels like it's too much, feels like a chore, right? It feels like every day I have to do this stuff. Oh, I have to meditate and exercise and cold exposure and breath work and so on. It's like, and it's almost like we build up this tower of habits, and eventually it becomes too much and it all collapses. Is that, can you relate to that? And is that something that you have, like, how do you deal with all the different things?
Never ever stick to protocol, and instead say, I'm going to mix it up. I'm going to explore. I'm going to experiment. When I put out on my channel something called the Zen swing that I combined with breath work, that came from somebody on my course that said, Dave, have you ever tried doing breathing in a 4/4 rhythm whilst doing the Zen swing? If you don't know what that is, check it out on my channel. And I said, no, let's give it a go. So we gave it a go, and I went, oh, that feels amazing. And that's what I want people to do. Take the one thing, learn it, and then every day think, I wonder what would happen if I tried that with this. Yesterday I was suffering from hay fever. Excuse me. And I had a shiatsu book laying around. And I was reminding myself of some of the little things you can do in that. And I thought, okay, I know that something called ujjayi breath increases nitric oxide, creates vasodilation, so in other words, the blood vessels open, and therefore can unblock the nose. So quite often I do ujjayi breath to unblock the nose. I then thought, why don't I specifically press an area in my hand that has a meridian line linked to certain areas of the nose and that part of the head, and see if that could work, maybe whilst I do some breath work. So in other words, I'm so excited still by all of this. I'm always thinking, I wonder what will happen if. And that's how you do it. One of the things I quite often talk to people about or tell them about is having this childlike mindset, this awe mindset. But as we get older, we lose it. When you become a parent, you see it. But still, you see it as being out of reach. You think, well, I'm a grown-up now. I can't play. I can't see through their eyes, because their eyes are saying, wow, that's amazing. But actually you can. If you really deeply look at things, if you start applying that mindset to everything around you, looking at the tree thinking, wow, if that tree were able to witness something, witness things, that tree's over 400 years old. What would it have witnessed just there in that spot? Just having that kind of mindset where you're constantly thinking like that means, again, that you're applying this exploratory, experimental mindset. That's when things start to get exciting again.
Yeah, and playful. Like you're staying in a kind of in a playful mode.
There's a guy called Dr. Stephen Jepson on YouTube, and he's about, I think he's either a septuagenarian or octogenarian. He's certainly close to 80 now. And his YouTube channel is very small. There's only a few videos on there, and he talks about exactly that. Get out into the backyard and play. So in his backyard, he has a slack line. Bearing in mind how old he is, he has a slack line. He bounces 2 balls off an angled wall. He does all these different things to keep his body and mind in the right state, to work on his cerebellum, on balance activities, to work on his cognitive ability. He's playing all the time.
That sounds great. I'm going to have to look that up. Yeah, we'll also put that in the show notes. That sounds really cool. All right. Yes, that's awesome. Now I feel like we've only touched on probably like half or fewer of the things that we could have talked about, but I don't want to take up too much of your time here either. But yeah, I think this is really fascinating. And thank you very much for sharing with us. As a final thing, like I said, we'll put links in the show notes, but just, is there anything that you want to tell our audience about where they should go to find you?
I really appreciate it. And you're right, there's far too many things that I do, unfortunately. It would be impossible to do one show, I suppose. But yeah, do check out my website, daveflorence.com. On there, you'll see the various different services that I offer. I've got my new course that's been running now for a few months, and the next one starts next Monday. An evolutionary flow course covering many of the stuff that we've been talking about: breathwork, movement, kinesiology, lots of things like that. It's only 10 days, a lovely little course where you will go away with lots of ideas and practices. I'm working on a much bigger course that people should stand by for, but just check out my YouTube channel as well, Evolution of Dave. Lots of stuff on there to sort of reset your mind, etc.
Good stuff, yeah. Yeah, so we will link to all that in the description, in the show notes, and people know where to go for that. With that, thank you very much, Dave. This has been a pleasure. And I hope we'll maybe catch up at some future point and touch on some of these other things that we didn't get to this time around.
Cheers, my man. Thank you.